Alright then guys, how to make your car less edgy, grip roll less, generally feel a little bit less nervous on the track so you can drive more confidently. Point number one, add sidewall glue to the outward sidewall of your front tyres. So, this works by, especially for grip roll, this one is very good. When we're in the corner and we've got all of the force going into the tyres, the car rolls over. And when it gets to the point where it's about to grip roll, the glue that we add to the outward sidewall just touches the ground. And that glue really doesn't have any grip at all. So as soon as we get into the corner and the car really rolls over onto that sidewall, it can just give up a little bit of grip and allows the front end to slide right at that point where the car would have flipped over. So you basically, the easiest way that we've found to do it is we get like a cotton earbud and just put a little bit of glue on there, and then you can just wipe that glue around the edge of the tyre. People have different ways of putting it on, but anyway, like that gets some glue onto the side of your tyre is really going to help with the grip roll that you have. It allows the front end to give up that traction. What it will do is reduce your steering a little bit, particularly in the middle of the corner. But if you get it right, hopefully you can get that balance between the glue only making a difference at the point where you would previously have grip rolled. The second thing that we have on the list is lower roll centers. So roll centers, if you have high roll centers, a lot of the force that comes into the bottom of the tyres just goes into the arms and the links, and the geometry becomes very, very stiff. The car responds very, very quickly to any of your inputs, to any bumps that the car might find. It just responds super quickly to anything going on the track, and also has a tendency to lift up more. When we have a higher roll centre, the car actually experiences something called the jacking force. So the higher that the roll center is on a car, the more that it basically wants to lift up in the corners. So lowering the roll center, the car is going to be a little bit softer, so it's less responsive, takes more time to roll, and it's going to roll more downwards in the corners. It's not going to stand up as much and be as reactive. This very much helps with edginess on kind of bumpy tracks or something like that. It's very high grip and bumpy. Often lower roll centers are going to make your car easier to drive in those conditions. It does also usually help with grip roll as well. For the same reasons as I've just mentioned, you don't have as much initial grip in the car, and it doesn't try and lift up or jack up as much in the corners. So lower roll centers is a good way of doing that. There's obviously a few ways to lower your roll center. Some of the good ways of doing it might be lifting up the camber links on the inside, on the shock tower on a four-wheel drive, or just lifting the ball studs by adding spacers on two-wheel drive. Other ways might be lowering the hinge pins on the inside on your C and D block going down on two-wheel drive, adding a spacer under the front bulkhead, lowering the rear hinge pin, things like that. Just lets the car roll in more and not be as sudden grip and flip style. The third part is lowering the ride height. So obviously if we lower the ride height of the car, the centre of mass and everything is lower. And at the end of the day, again, this one mainly for grip roll, the centre of mass and the force at the bottom of the tyres have a distance between them. And when there's a distance between forces, that causes a rotation. If I push either side of my head at a distance apart, it makes it want to rotate. It's the same thing with your car. When you have a centre of mass and the tyres like this, it wants to make it flip over. So if you can lower that centre of mass a little bit, you help reduce that effect of the car wanting to flip over in the corners, since that distance is now shorter. Obviously the downsides of lowering the car is that it will be closer to the ground. So if you're on a bumpy track or a track with a lot of jumps, something like that, it might become a little bit more difficult in those sections. But in the flat corners, unless you're running it super, super low already, it shouldn't be much of an issue. Number 3 is softening the springs or the roll bars, basically allowing the car to roll more as we come into the corners. Kind of like I mentioned with the roll center, when we have a car that's very stiff and we first turn into a corner, it immediately just loads the tyres up and doesn't give the car any time to kind of just settle into the corner. You get that immediate load in the tyres that can make something happen that you might not want to happen. So if you allow the car to be softer, when you turn the wheel, it's going to take a little bit more time for the grip on the tyres to kind of build up. It might not just immediately flip off the track. And this makes a very big difference also on bumps. If you have a car that's very stiff and it hits a bump, it kind of just reacts immediately to the bump. The suspension doesn't compress very much, and something again will happen. Your car will either dart into the corner or it will flick one way. So having that softer suspension will really help you in that way. The next part is the shock positions on the tower. So I recently made a video on this. Leaning the shocks in and out on the tower has a couple of effects. So when we lean the shocks further in, the suspension gets softer and it gets a little bit more progressive. So it takes longer for the stiffness in the suspension to build as we roll into the corner. So leaning the shocks in is really good to just take that initial grip out of the tyres. It takes again a little bit longer for that load to just transfer to the outside tyres. And it just gives us a little bit longer for the car to react to bumps and react to our inputs. The next part is increasing the size of the hole in your piston and increasing the shock oil to go with it as well. So say you're running something like 2-hole 1.7, 2-hole 1.8, you could go to 2-hole 1.8 and 2-hole 1.9 and then go up sort of 5-weight in shock oil as well. What that does is take the pack out of the car and allow the suspension to move a little bit more during sudden moments on the track. So it usually calms the car down quite a bit. Again, coming into the corners when you're sort of turning in, the car's going to be a little bit calmer in those instances. And again, whenever you're hitting bumps, it's going to be much calmer in those scenarios. You're going to have less pack now. The wheel's going to be able to just jump out of the way more quickly rather than really loading itself up and just spitting you in some direction on the track. Another one to consider is lengthening the camber link. So when we go to longer camber links, this means that the car can roll a little bit further and a little bit more slowly. And again, that's that feeling that we're after, where it takes longer for the car to respond and the tyres to load up as aggressively. The camber links have a very distinct way of increasing or reducing how predictable the car is, especially in kind of like bumpy or difficult scenario. I've always found that if you lengthen the camber links, especially on the rear end, if you have kind of a sweeping corner with undulations or something in it, or it's a little bit bumpy, the car becomes much more consistent in that area of the track and more easy to predict what it's going to do. You'll notice a lot of the things I've just mentioned are kind of based around trying to make it take longer for the tyres to just load up in the corner. And that is pretty much what we're going for. Usually if you have a very edgy feeling car that feels sort of over responsive and maybe has too much initial grip that can even flip you off the track, that's what you want to do. You want to make it take longer for the load to transfer between the tyres on your car. So there's other things as well that maybe I haven't mentioned, but generally you probably want to make your car roll a little bit more, take longer to set into the corner, and anything that's going to do that is probably going to help you. Another thing to consider is just reducing the amount of front end grip that you have, as well as doing the sidewall glue. Maybe you could run a different front tyre, cut more spikes off the front if you're on Astro, something like that. Because if your car feels unpredictable as well, or edgy, that could often mean that your car is kind of understeering one moment, then it's oversteering, then it's whatever, and you just don't know what it's going to do. And sometimes in that scenario, if you think you can get away with it, if you just reduce the front end traction, it makes the car much more predictable and do a similar thing much more often. That is it for this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.